Okay, this video is about adjectives. Specifically, it's about the complements of adjectives. So it's going to help you do the analysis about picking out preposition complements of adjectives. I'm going to zero in on that one. It's on page 126 in your book. It's number 7. It asks you which of the following adjectives license prepositional phrase complements with a particular preposition as their head. And we'll talk about how you do that analysis, what to watch out for when you do that analysis. First, we're going to start out by talking about how exactly you make sure that you have an adjective. Let's just be clear that we know what an adjective is in English. So the characteristics of adjectives, let's look first at the morphological characteristics. What suffixes do they take? And you know the one that's characteristic of adjectives is the comparative suffix and the superlative suffix, the and the est, like slower, slowest. And then many adjectives take that kind of morphology. Some of the ones that don't express the same meaning with a periphrastic construction, that's to say with more or most. So more quickly, most quickly. All right, those will point you toward adjectives. And syntactic characteristics that will point you toward adjectives are that they can be modifiers in noun phrases. So when you have a phrase where the head is a noun, you can have an adjective phrase that's a dependent of that head. Now let's talk about a few complications. For one thing, there are some adjectives that aren't gradable, so they don't want to use the word very. Slow isn't one of them, right? You can be very slow. However, take an adjective like wooden. You can't have something really that's very wooden. It sort of is either wooden or it isn't. The ones that aren't gradable resist the comparative and the superlative constructions. So in the same way that you don't have something that's very wooden, you don't really have a bowl that's more wooden than another bowl, right? Or you don't have the most wooden bowl. So one problem with the morphological characteristics is that they don't apply to every adjective. Sometimes you can have an adjective that the morphology doesn't work with. Another problem is that the ones that the morphology does work with may, in fact, not be adjectives, because that can also pick out adverbs. Adverbs and adjectives in English share morphology. You already know this. So you can get slower and slowest, and you can also get, let's do an adverb, quickly. You can get more quickly and most quickly. So once you've identified a word as having comparative and superlative morphology, then you have to ask yourself, is it an adjective or an adverb? Okay, the second property, the syntactic property that an adjective can be a modifier in a noun phrase, this is the one that will tell you, because adverbs don't do that. So here are some examples. We have in the dark with his silent father. His silent father is a noun phrase. Father is, of course, the head. Silent is an adjective phrase that's a dependent in there. If we put in the word silently, his silently father, it doesn't work. Here's another one, the elegant creatures. Elegant is an adjective. That phrase sounds good. The elegantly creatures, that one doesn't work. So the syntactic characteristic that an adjective is able to modify a noun does distinguish it from an adverb. What it doesn't do is distinguish an adjective from a noun. So now we have the other problem. Suppose we identify the adjective syntactically. We say, okay, silent is an adjective because it can modify father in this noun phrase. And then what if somebody points out to us that you can also say a small New England town where she lives with her fisherman father, and therefore fisherman must be an adjective. Or instead of the elegant creatures, you can say the sea creatures. Sea must be an adjective. Well, no. the problem with the syntactic characteristic is that while it does help us distinguish adjectives from adverbs, it doesn't help us distinguish adjectives from nouns, because nouns can also modify other nouns. Fisherman is a noun. It can become plural, it can become fishermen, and it can take a determiner, the fisherman, etc., etc. It has all the properties of a noun. Nouns can also modify other nouns. So you have to use a combination of characteristics. And here's another property similar to that one, another syntactic characteristic that will distinguish an adjective from an adverb, but will again not distinguish it from a noun. Another syntactic characteristic of an adjective is that it can head a phrase that is a predicative complement. Remember the predicative complements? A topic about which the company remains silent. Remains can license a predicative complement. So we don't say that silent here is the direct object of remains, right? A direct object would have to be a noun under almost any cases, very few exceptions. It's silent here is a predicative complement. The verb that most often licenses predicative complements is, of course, the be verb here. It was elegant and technologically superior. A compound adjective, okay? Elegant and superior, two adjectives linked by a coordinator. Compound adjective phrase. And it functions as a predicative complement. An adverb does not go in there. We could not say it was elegantly. A topic about which the company remains silently. It doesn't work. All right? However, remember that a noun as well as an adjective can be a predicative complement. So if you have a predicative complement, you've demonstrated that you don't have an adverb, but you haven't demonstrated that you don't have a noun. You're down to either an adjective or a noun. So take a look at this example. Another concern is money. The be verb, again, it's not licensing a direct object, right? The be verb licenses predicative complements. Money is a noun phrase, undeniably. How about remains? AOL remains king, blah, blah, blah. This is a long noun phrase, right? King of, etc., etc. A long noun phrase, which is a predicative complement. So the predicative complement characteristic helps you distinguish adjectives from adverbs. And here's another characteristic that will help you distinguish adjectives from nouns. And that's another syntactic characteristic, which is that adjectives can be modified by adverbs and nouns can't. The most useful adverbs to use for this test are very and to. All right, here we go. But eventually the zombies would make one attack. Too obvious died. Obvious is an adjective. It can be modified by the adverb to. The second sentence, I walked into the viewing room and it was very silent. Silent is an adjective. It can be modified by very. Here are the examples that show you that an adverb can't be modified by these other adverbs, right? Her death was very news worldwide. You can actually get a meaning out of that, right? The grammar is simply unworkable. News is a noun, and very. An adverb doesn't modify a noun. An adverb modifies an adjective or another adverb. It was too winter to go out without a coat. This sentence can't occur because winter is a noun. Too is an adverb that could modify an adjective but not a noun. Those adverbs work with adjectives so well that even the ones that we would think, even some of the ones that we would think wouldn't allow grading, like wouldn't didn't work very well, right? But there are some where you'd think by the meaning that it wouldn't allow grading, but still those adverbs work with it in a way that we can understand, whether we can pick a bone with it or not. These are all sentences from the corpus, and I think that they're all published, actually. The first one certainly is, there happens to be not a mummified princess, but a very dead young museum worker. Now, dead is kind of an either-or thing, right? You would have said that this is ungradable, and yet we understand that sentence perfectly, and it doesn't even sound bad. Here's another one. We hear this one all the time, right? A very pregnant Natalie Portman. You hear that all the time. We understand that. Even wooden which sounded terrible with very, is taking the word to here. To, wooden, and remote. Granted, in this case, it's a metaphor. This would probably not happen if they were using the word wooden literally. Nevertheless, very unique. Okay, this is one that tends to bother people who know the rule, that the meaning of unique means there's nothing else like it in the world. So they say that you can't grade unique. Either something is one of its kind or there is another one. There's no in between, and so you should never say very unique. If you want to follow that rule, you will probably garner some respect from those people. I try to follow it myself, but it's difficult because even words like this that we know have a meaning that's not gradable tend to attract these adverbs. That's just sort of how adjectives work. So those are some properties that can distinguish adjectives from other kinds of words. If you use a combination of the properties, you can distinguish them from adverbs and from nouns. And you should be able to say with confidence that they're adjectives. Now let's go to the main question, which is what kind of complements adjectives can have. The answer is that the complements are almost always of one kind. If you've read this chapter already, you probably know what that kind is. I'll give you these examples. What do you see after the adjectives in these phrases? The constellation Virgo is famous for its galaxies. It's been rough on his Haitian-born parents. The power and efficiency inherent in gas turbines. Believe it or not, I was pretty good at math and science. Look for the adjectives and look for what's following them. You see that? Prepositional phrases, right? Those are the most common kind of complements of adjectives. Now, why am I saying that these are complements of the adjectives? Can you guess what I'm about to say? Remember the difference between complements and adjuncts. Adjuncts are licensed by their head. Complements are licensed by their head and adjuncts aren't. Complements are licensed. Adjuncts occur wherever they want to. Let me show you some prepositional phrases that are adjuncts, all right? These are not complements. These are adjuncts. The constellation Virgo is famous for its galaxies. Now here comes the adjunct, in Paris. It's been rough on his Haitian-born parents, in Paris. The next two sentences also, in Paris, can be added. It doesn't matter very much what's preceding it. In Paris is an adjunct. It can fit grammatically into any of these sentences. It doesn't need anything particular there to license it. Here's another one. You see it? Under many circumstances. Also a prepositional phrase, right? But it's fitting in anywhere here. It doesn't need a special adjective to license it. Okay, let's go back and look at the complements. Take the first complement prepositional phrase, for its galaxies. Notice if we change that to by, we get the constellation Virgo is famous by its galaxies. Bad sentence. You may be able to pull the meaning out of it, but it doesn't matter. We just don't say famous by. The constellation Virgo is identifiable for its galaxies. Also pretty weird. Doesn't sound like the right grammar. The reason the second one fails is that famous doesn't license a prepositional phrase headed by. The reason the third one doesn't fail is that identifiable, also a good adjective, but it doesn't license a prepositional phrase headed by for. Adjectives are picky about the prepositional phrases, the prepositional phrase complements that they license. That's what the analysis is asking you about, okay? It's asking you, look at these adjectives you have and pick out exactly which prepositions they're going to let complement them, which prepositional phrases they're going to let complement them. Here's another example. It's been rough on his Haitian-born parents. Perfectly good. It's been rough to his Haitian-born parents. Perfectly understandable and wrong. Rough goes with on, not with to, which is to say it licenses a prepositional phrase headed by on. Now, there are some adjectives that license more than one preposition, sometimes with different meanings and sometimes with pretty similar meanings. If we take good at, we can usually say good in and mean pretty much the same thing. Good at math, good in math, pretty much the same thing. Good for math is a different meaning. Also grammatical, right? But good for math, good for nothing is, of course, the idiom that comes to mind. It's good can also license a prepositional phrase headed by for, but that's with a different meaning, and that's fine. Your book is not asking you to pick out a certain meaning, just what are the prepositions that each adjective is licensing. What you have to watch out for when you do the analysis is three things. First, make sure that you have a prepositional phrase. Make sure that the complement that you're claiming is a complement is in fact a prepositional phrase. It needs to start with a preposition. An adverb like sometimes may be able to occur at that place in the sentence, but that's just an adjunct. It's not a prepositional phrase and it's not a complement. A noun phrase might be able to occur at that place in the sentence, and it might even be a complement, but that's not what the analysis is asking you for. You need a prepositional phrase, so don't let that trip you up. All right. Second, make sure you put that prepositional phrase in the complement place. If it's a complement, it needs to go in the complement place, which is right after that adjective. The adjective is going to license a prepositional phrase complement immediately after it. If it doesn't fit there, you don't have the answer. Or possibly there is no answer. Possibly it's one of them that doesn't license any prepositional phrase. Last thing, make sure the prepositional phrase that you have is a complement, not just an adjunct. Look at the adjective and think about a preposition that feels like it goes with it, like good at, kind of goes together, right? Try to think of a preposition that feels like it goes with it. That's probably you're perceiving in what complement is probably why you feel that way about it. So you feel like the phrase is kind of an idiom. Like you have to put that preposition with that adjective, not just because of meaning, but because there's a custom that they might go together. There's a custom that they go together. Try using the phrase that you've picked out, the prepositional phrase that you've picked out as a possible complement, with a bunch of adjectives. If it's grammatical with a whole bunch of them, it's probably not a complement, it's probably an adjunct.